The world in the 1930s was a very different place to what we are living in now. Wars were constant and borders were constantly changing. For example, here's a map of the world in 2003. Now here's a map of the world currently. Now let's go back to 1931 and look at the differences in 1941. The only major difference in the last 15 years is the creation of South Sudan and the breakup of Yugoslavia, which isn't really Yugoslavia, it was just Serbia and Montenegro, and controversially Kosovo. From 1931 to 1941, Germany was able to take control of most of mainland Europe, from France to all of Eastern Europe. Japanese dominance over East Asia and the British takeover of the Middle East. Firstly, let's recap what happened before this event and the Great Depression. Hitler comes to power, Hitler gets angry, Germany takes some land, then Germany takes some more. They then invade Poland and split it up with the USSR. Then they invaded the Benelux, France, and then Norway. They also had control over Yugoslavia, as well as Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary joining the Axis, as well as Italy having control over Ethiopia, Greece, and Albania. And don't forget Vichy France having control of North Africa. Some historians claim the war between the Nazis and Soviets was inevitable. Some believe that Stalin would eventually declare war on Germany. It is believed that Hitler and Stalin only cooperated as they had a mutual goal, which was taking out Poland. Before World War I, Poland was split between Germany and Russia, and the borders were very similar to what they did after the invasion. They were just taking back old land, practically. The split of Poland was known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This was a non-aggression pact between the two, saying, please don't attack each other. This was then broken when Germany declared war. It was effectively non-existent on the 22nd of June, which is when Germany invaded it, but officially null and void on the 30th of June, so for 8 days technically, they were at war but had a non-aggression pact. Germany declared war on the Soviets because Hitler did not like Slavs. Russia was full of Slavic people. A Russian person is a Slavic person. They're equal, but not all Slavic people are Russians. He wanted to get rid of these Slavs and repopulate ethnic Germans. On Hitler's ladder of racial superiority, the Slavs were right near the bottom. They were basically subhuman. They were at the bottom with Romanis, Poles, and Jews. His policy was known as Lebensraum. Hitler needed more land for the master race being Aryan people, the Nordic and Germanic people. Now, the Nordic people are people from Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Germanic people from like Germany and UK. Hitler needed to kill these Slavs in Russia, basically. As the USSR was a large country, there was plenty of space for the Aryan people to live. They would clear lands and fill it and repopulate it with Aryan people. All the people living in Germany could have now more land for themselves in Russia. This is why Germany declared war on the Soviets. So now into Barbarossa. It was the largest invading force in history, inflicting millions of deaths. Over 1 million men were on the front lines initially. That number dramatically went up by the end. Over 3,000 German Panzers, which are tanks, over 3,000 German AFVs, which are armored fighting vehicles, up to 5,300 German planes, up to 23,000 pieces of German artillery, and 17,081 German mortars. Compared to the mighty Soviet, 2.9 million personnel, 11,000 tanks, 9,000 planes, and 14 million people in reserve. That's right, 14 million, bigger than Belgium's population now, and countries like Chad and Somalia, and many, many more countries. These forces went head to head. This was the largest amount of guns, people, aircraft, and tanks ever used in a military operation in history. The start of the operation led to early German pushes, as it is believed that the Soviets weren't ready. People claim Stalin was surprised by the invasion, but a lot believe the contrary, saying that Stalin wasn't that stupid and knew they would attack. Apparently, it's almost certain that he was gonna attack one day. Soviets honestly did not believe Hitler was that stupid to put himself into a two-front war. And well, boy were they wrong. He probably just didn't know when. Hitler's army was able to push far into Russia. This seemed huge for the Nazis. It seemed like they could have won from here. The Soviets then migrated their factory workers and their factories far to the east. This was a smart decision because if the Germans reached the Urals, the Soviets could easily defend it and the factory workers would be safe. If the Soviets left their industry on the western side of the Urals being a huge mountain range that separates Russia basically, And yeah, the Soviets put all the factories there. If they left it on the western side, Germany could take these factories and the Soviet supply would be severely hindered. The troops would have no supply and would be weak because they were the east of the Urals, the Soviets survived, and they won the war. The Nazis will never take them, and neither would the Japanese. It was the safest place the Soviets could put their industry. For the Japanese to get to the Urals, they would have to go through Siberia, which is unforgiving, endless lands of like ice and snow. Another Soviet strategy was throwing troops on the front line. The Soviets had the third largest population in the world, only behind British Raj, which is now India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, and China. It meant they could almost waste their troops, which is what they did basically. In Operation Barbarossa, the Axis just lost over 1 million troops, while the Soviets lost almost 5 million people. During the whole war, the Soviets were estimated to have at most 27 million casualties. They won the war because of the amount of troops they put on the front lines. They won the war because of their brute force. While Hitler was able to push far, he was probably never going to push further due to superior Soviet manpower and supply. Now onto the main parts of the operation. Germany used blitzkrieg strategies to push the Soviets through ground and air attacks. The Luftwaffe, the Air Force, carried attacks on command control centers. These attacks would make it harder for the Soviets to organize themselves and move. Without direction, it would be near impossible for them to move. The war was fought on many fronts, as the border between these two was huge. While you had Finland, who was kind of independent, having a huge border with the Soviets, you had all the way from Estonia all the way down to Romania, Moldova. That is like a huge front line, which is all of Eastern Europe. There were battles in the Baltic states, so Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, and Moldavia, and Barbarossa, which is usually called Belarus. Now onto the furthest Hitler pushed. Hitler's army was on the border of Moscow. During the Battle of Moscow, the Soviet army was equal to the Germans, as the Soviets had almost used a lot of it. But Stalin was able to field 83 divisions to defend Moscow. Only a small few were effective, though. The German armies were moving fast and encircling Russian troops. It is believed 5 million Russian troops were captured, but not protected under the Geneva Conference, as Russia did not sign one of the parts of it. As well as a lot of war crimes being committed there, which includes sexual violence towards the people that lived in Moscow, as well as the German army just killing people. The terrible weather slowed the German advance, as the panzers found it harder to advance through the mud due to ongoing rainfall. Germany tried to attack Moscow from the north and south using the 3rd and 4th Panzer armies and the 2nd Panzer Group, respectively. The Germans then experienced terrible weather, blizzards, and this almost made it practically impossible for the Germans to invade. These were conditions that the Soviets were much more effective in. The Soviets would have kept fighting if Moscow was taken, but would have been a huge loss to the Soviets. The Battle of Moscow is very important for both sides. If Germany won it, it would have given the army huge motivation and huge confidence. Moscow would have been a huge loss to the Soviets, seeing it was their capital. The Soviets needed to keep their capital. Losing their capital is devastating to any country. The Soviets were able to hold on to Moscow luckily. The failure of the German army led to the failure of Operation Barbarossa, which is why Barbarossa failed in December. This is one reason why the battle was so important. One key individual of the Operation Barbarossa was Erich Marx. Erich served as a general for the German Empire, the Weimar Republic, and Nazi Germany, the 3 stages of Germany in the early 20th century. He was the person who authored the plans for Operation Barbarossa. He drafted the invasion plans for Russia, so setting out all the movement of the troops and the cities they were going to push to. He unfortunately died during D-Day when he was hit by an airstrike from Allied planes, and he was hospitalized that day and then later died in hospital. Operation Barbarossa was very significant, as if Hitler did not invade the USSR, they would not need to fight a two-front war at the time, as the Germans were in a good position in the war. All they needed to do was make peace with the United Kingdom or force them to surrender, and the war could be over. It dramatically changed the course of the war. It was one of the most significant turning points, as it completely changed the shape of the war. It changed it from Hitler fighting only, trying to get to UK and fight them there, because currently at the time they were doing air raids over London, which was constant bombing, and also it meant he had to put a large number of troops on the border for Russia so he could invade them. And so the successes looked promising for the Reich, but after these events, it led to the fall of the country. The operation is also very significant in human history, as some of the worst atrocities and the highest casualties of the war. After the operation, Germany was able to push to Rostov and Sevastopol, so they pushed pretty far into southwestern Russia, so all around the port cities, around like Stalingrad, places like that. The Germans were then pushed back after their early successes and then eventually fell to the Soviets and the Allies. The western side was split up by the Allies, a part each admitted by France, UK and USA. The Soviet Union had the eastern half, while Berlin was split between the Allies and the Soviet Union. This is how Germany fell and their borders completely changed. In my personal opinion, from Hitler's perspective, if Hitler wanted to invade the Soviets because he thought the Slavs were inferior, it was probably not best to at the time. The time Hitler did meant he had to fight a two-front war, which was never desirable. If he waited until he defeated Britain, the Soviets would have been too strong, as they were fairly weak before the war. If they invaded Poland and the USSR at the same time, Germany would have not been that strong either, the Soviets also being pretty weak. So there's no real right time to invade the Soviets. The best option would be just not to invade the Soviets, and use their help to defeat the Allies, which almost happened when Germany offered the Soviets to be in the Axis, a plan that almost went through. After this war, there probably would have been something like a cold war between the two, after they probably would have split up the Allied territories between them, and half the countries going fascist, half the countries going communist. This could have been better for Germany, as they would have had a lot of the former British and French territories, as well as all the other countries they invaded. Overall, Barbarossa was a really bad decision which could have easily been avoided. Thank you for watching this video. It's been really long, but I hope you learned something. Thank you. Bye.